DEFORMIS. I pulled into the empty parking lot and found a spot close to the entrance. Getting out of my car, I craned my neck to look up at the building where I was to meet Gaines. Through the falling snow, I saw a plain brown building. Most of the lights in the offices were off, maybe about 20 stories tall. Apparently I was to meet him in the basement, so I wasn't about to work up a sweat climbing up all those stairs. Entering the main lobby, I walked past an elderly security guard, a woman, who waved me through. Following the instructions given to me by Gaines, I continued down the main hallway until I reached a sign which read Research and Studies. Was this a science center or something? I headed down the stairs and came upon a hallway of doors. I truly had no idea what this building was. I don't remember seeing an address or anything on the outside. I found the door marked 105 and entered. A man was crouching behind a desk, counting whispered numbers aloud. He turned quickly when he saw me come through the door. "Jesus!" He literally jumped out of his seat and covered his bearded face with one hand. I noticed he had a wedding ring on it. He quickly laughed off the scare and came over to me smiling. "Hey Barry, it's been a while. Being down here, I mean to say, haven't had a visitor in a few hours. I'm super sorry about all that." He talked as fast as someone who just downed half a dozen coffees. He extended his hand and we shook. "Nice to finally meet you, Barry. Please, come sit." He asked about the snow, if I got here okay, and if his directions were helpful. I assured him that the roads were clear and his advice was sound. He led me over to his desk and turned off his monitor. The numbers or letters on the screen disappeared. "So," he said, turning from his monitor to me, "you're likely wondering why I brought you here and how what I have to say relates to your abduction or encounter or whatever have you. Is this about right?" I nodded. I was contacted by Frederick Gaines via email after posting several concerned comments on an alien abduction-related website. I never thought I'd be one of those poor souls. I felt like a crazy person. After many sleepless nights and several terrifying events, I'd become a believer. I had hoped that someone could tell me something that would help me. I honestly didn't know what answer I was looking for. Gaines contacted me recently and explained he could perhaps shed some light on the matter. Even in his email, he seemed like an educated man, not some teenager pranking me. In retrospect, I never even asked what he did for a living. Ideas formed in my head regarding who this man really was. "Well," Gaines said, "why don't you start from the beginning?" I shifted in my chair a little. I preempted my tale by saying I knew how crazy it all seemed. He smiled and told me not to worry how it sounded. "I've never brought someone here who I thought was a loony. Seriously, go on." I started by telling him about the first night, when I thought I saw something moving in my room. I live alone, with no animals, so naturally this was a little disturbing, like a dancing shadow or something. I thought rationally about what it could be. I chalked this up to some trick of the mind, until the following events made me think of that night as the beginning. The following week, I thought I spied a face peering at me from the window. The curtains were drawn, and the second I sat up to look, it seemed to disappear, or pull away from the window. Gaines asked me if it looked human or alien, and I told him the truth, which is that I couldn't remember. But it was a face of something, to be sure. It could have been a raccoon or a cat. I live out near the edge of the country. I had my doubts until the following night, when I thought I saw the face inside my room, near the edge of my bed. Peripherally, I added. The moment I tried to focus on it, it was gone, but I could see the ghost image faintly. Round head, eyes, mouth, a face. "Can I stop you there?" Gaines had his hands folded. He looked calm and not at all confused or suspicious of my story. "What makes you think this is an alien visiting you?" I hadn't really thought that it was at that point, not then. I filled Gaines in on my reason for the assumption. The following morning, after virtually no sleep, I began to type things like nightmares, face, window, onto the internet, and not long after I came across alien abduction articles. The more I read, the more I started to tremble. The thought had never occurred to me that alien visitations could be real. The more I read, the more images I saw of grays, the more I wanted to turn the computer off. I felt a cold sweat begin to cover my back. I read on for several hours until noon. Nothing happened the following week, or the next. Week 3, just after waking up, just about to get out of bed, I felt a presence in the room with me. Gaines interrupted. How so? I told him I couldn't explain it, just that the room felt thick, it felt smaller. Cautiously, I went to roll out of bed, and I screamed. Standing above me to my left was a thing, a gray. It looked almost exactly like the pictures online, but its skin was yellow, almost sickly. Even in the dark room, I could see it quite well. It was horrible. Large black eyes, like that of a mantis. So close to human, yet so far. In that gap, that difference, I think, lied the horror. I sat watching it for a second, truly paralyzed with fear. It was breathing slowly. Very quickly, its four-fingered hand reached for me, and all I could do was scream again in a sharp and painful howl and turn my body away. My eyes were shut tight. I couldn't stop seeing its insect face. Couldn't stop seeing the smooth hand snap towards me. I should have felt it touch me, but I think even at that point it was gone somehow. In the room with Gaines, I began to cry. After taking a moment to compose myself, I told him the rest. I hadn't had any visitations since, but in the last 2 weeks, each and every night, I was positive it would happen again. And it would take me. I knew it. I told him that his response couldn't have come soon enough. I asked him what his thoughts of everything I had told him. He took in a long, deep breath. His gaze shifted from me to the window. I glanced warily, but saw only a small window with blinds shut tight. Basement window. Gaines was looking at me when I looked back at him. First of all, and I'll spoil the ending by saying this, but first of all, there is no alien. His transition from babbling to silence was impressive. I sat perplexed. Oh hell, this is the part where he tells me it's all in my head. And then the room with the comfy walls and the jacket. Was this guy with the government? Gaines continued in his quick-paced, frantic chatter. What I mean to say is that there is good news and bad, but they are one and the same. There is no alien. Maybe no aliens at all. Yeah. I assured him that what I saw could have been nothing else. The distinctive features, the nightly visitations. I was starting to get my back up. After all, I assumed I would find answers here, not more questions. Did I expect a UFO expert with tips and tricks or something? Gaines raised a hand and, smiling, said, Look, I know you think I don't believe you. You're wrong, I do. But it's your turn to take a leap of faith and believe me. I have reason to believe that this thing that's been in your room at night is a... His sudden silence again was infuriating. A what? I shouted, suddenly aware of how loud my voice seemed in the small room. I'm sorry, Gaines apologized before I could, and he motioned with his hands that he was getting to his point. The problem here, at this point, is that I don't want to name this thing. I don't want to call it something, because the second I do, I think somehow it would be giving it more power. I think. I truly didn't understand. To be frank, I mostly couldn't get the idea out of my head that I had seen an actual alien. It could have been nothing else. Mr. Gaines, what did I see in my room? I waited several seconds, and after what felt like an eternity, Gaines replied, Gaines is fine, Barry. Just Gaines, that is. Yeah, I'm telling you that what you saw started out as something more like a blank slate. And then, hey, one day it's an alien. The alien thing, real as it seemed, it's like a mask that it wears. You've made it easy. You gave it a persona. A persona? Look, don't try to tell me it's all in my head. Gaines looked like he wanted to say something, but stayed silent and merely shook his head. No, Barry, I believe you saw what you saw, but I also firmly believe that before you were sure it was an alien, you subconsciously contemplated what could be in your room. So what the hell is it? If aliens are ruled out, what, a demon? It could be, but I'm betting it's not. Bet it's pretended to be one, though. Bet it's been a few ghosts, among other stereotypes. What's your basis for any of this? I've been following these kinds of things for a while. Looking for specific things, specific questions. Yeah. Gaines, what do you do for a living?
Barry, I have a job. I work here. I got you to meet me at my place of work. But this whole thing that we're talking about right now is more like a hobby. Or an obsession. You could call it that, Barry. I'm trying to tell you a few key things here. Pardon me for being so absent-minded. A few pertinent things to take away tonight.
Okay.
All right, thing one. This entity or what have you, it's quite dangerous. Without beating around the bush, it can kill you. I believe that they kill people all the time. So yeah, thing two, there's more than one. Like, a lot. Thing three, where they come from.
Where do they come from?
From you. From people. From your head, in a way. Ever stare at your bedroom closet as a child and see a monster? Turns out later to be your jacket sitting in a weird way. The longer you stared at that jacket, though, in the dark, that jacket looked like a creature. There's this quote, some line of a book about staring at the void and the void stares back or something. It's like that, I think. Inventions come from people's heads. Everything around you, this office, this computer, this chair, they came from the ideas in people's heads. Now they're real. They went from a thought to a thing. That's what it is.
I sat silent for a moment. His words were like disturbing poetry. I understood what he was trying to say, but I couldn't make it seem possible in my mind.
Barry, I know this is a lot to drop on a person. I've been in your shoes. I've had trouble believing before seeing, but you're halfway there. You've actually seen the thing as something different. Sure. But you've seen it with your own fucking eyes. Pardon my French. But yeah, you get that this is a real thing that we're talking about, okay?
Sure, it's definitely real, whatever it is. That was the one thing I was sure of at this point. Gaines, why did you really contact me? His eyes darted behind me for a second. Gaines smiled a little inside. He explained that he frequently monitors several hundred websites, anything relating to paranormal or unexplainable events. His computer shifts through comments and forums, sifting and searching for certain words or phrases. His custom program compiles all the relevant data, and the rest is up to him. He spends most of his day reading countless pages of text, conversations that were flagged as a possible lead, like he was some sort of private eye.
I start by finding people who may have come across these things, whatever they may be. They always seem to recall a shadow or a shape, something out of the corner of their eye, vague. Then within as little as one night, it becomes something very specific, a specific shape, usually some sort of urban legend or cryptid. Then I try to find out if they're one kind of person or the other. If they're person type 1, then this thing never gets to be more than a one-time crazy nightmare. Or worse, they go insane and end up in some psych ward.
His smile was gone, and I could see he wasn't making a joke.
Person type 2 is bad. Like, it's not in your best interest to be person 2. These people run the risk of somehow fueling this thing and giving it a more physical form. Then it can hurt you somehow. Then it can kill you, and I don't really know how it does that exactly. I firmly believe that my friend and colleague Martin was killed by one of these.
Holy shit. I couldn't help myself. This guy could be bullshitting me, but I felt no sense of anything false about Gaines. A whole new wave of fear came over me, and it was no comfort having no name for this thing.
He was found in his bed, and that's all that I know. He was younger than me, and his family said he had a heart attack. Martin and I were both looking into this same phenomenon. He seemed more and more tired in the last weeks of his life. I still can't stop thinking about him. I miss him more than anything. A great guy.
I told Gaines I was sorry for his loss, and shared the fact that I lost my infant son when I was still married to my wife. I heard sympathy in his voice, but also interest, like he had found some clue. I regretted telling him. I let it go, and instead asked him what I was afraid to. Which type of person do you think I am? Gaines looked at his folded hands.
I don't know, honestly. I don't even know if there are two types. Seems like the ones with overactive imaginations are the most vulnerable. Artists, writers. Some people just live with it and survive it, and some people get killed by it, like cancer. I've spoken with 20 or so people just such as yourself. You're the first one I've met in person. You live so close. Few of them didn't believe me, and I've never heard from them again. Yeah, which could mean nothing.
What about the others? What things have they seen? Gaines looked at his watch and then at me again.
Ghosts, mostly. Another abduction story. Very similar to yours, in fact. Some demon-like imp creature. Oh, and some Chinese monster I've forgotten the name of. The guy was Chinese who saw it, I mean. Oh, Kappa. That's it, Barry. I gotta tell you a few helpful things before I kick you out of here. Love to have a slumber party, but even monster hunters need rest.
I checked my own watch. It was close to midnight. All right, I said. What tips and tricks do you have for me? I smiled, and he countered with a smirk that showed some laugh lines. Then he frowned.
What I want you to take away from tonight, Barry, is that this is a very serious thing that can do serious harm. From everything that my late friend Martin and I have learned, it seems like the best offense is a good defense. As in, don't give this thing any fodder. Don't attempt to draw it. Don't write about it. I honestly think talking about it is fine somehow because words are sort of non-physical, and yet giving it a name just feels like it could be dangerous.
What the hell do I do if I wake up next to this thing in my bed?
Holy shit, Barry, I forgot to tell you. Yeah, I'll tell you what to do first, but I forgot to tell you the crucial thing. It won't be an alien ever again. None of my other contacts have had reoccurring forms after we spoke. I think that you being aware that this alien form was a facade sort of ruins the fun. It'll be different from now on. Worse, actually.
I felt a sudden rush of anger. Why the hell did you say talking about it was fine? You said it would be okay. If I never met with you, I'd still think it was a fucking gray. Wouldn't that be better than all this mystery entity shit? What the fuck is it gonna be now? Gaines stood up with raised palms as if I were robbing him. He was robbing me of my sanity every minute I stayed here.
Barry, please let me finish. Through sheer luck, a group of people, including my latent partner and myself, have stumbled upon this whole thing. You get enough nerds looking at weird happenings, they eventually see some patterns, okay? You add up strange police reports, unexpected suicides, weird blogs about nightmares, stories of young people dying in their beds, mental patients rambling, and a ton of other shit, and you find out, hey, there's this thing straight out of a horror movie that defies physics. It gets born from the imagination like a living thought, looks like scary shit, and maybe gives you a heart attack or something.
So what's it gonna look like, and what do I do?
Right, sorry, yammering on once again. Okay, stay with me here.
Gaines tells me how it won't have a known form anymore, a side effect of people comprehending that it could be something other than what it looks like.
For all I know, Gaines says while catching another glimpse of his watch, only the members of my little secret group know about these things, and the contacts.
Several of his contacts wouldn't believe his story and insisted that they had, for example, been visited by their dead uncle. Gaines took a moment to reinforce the importance of knowing what it is not.
If you believe it's an alien, you don't give it any reason to leave. It could visit you until the day you die, which could be sooner than later if you, say, have an early heart attack or take your own life.
The other contacts, who, like me, could fathom such a concept as a thought monster, relayed their next encounters to Gaines. It was conjured somehow from thought, creating a horrifying form from the subconscious mind of the host. It would look like things that didn't exist, or an amalgam of things that did. Gaines began to go into great detail about one woman's version where every limb ended in the face of a rotting corpse. She heard teeth cracking when it stepped towards her on their hardwood floor. I stopped him before he could go further. Is it fear, then? I felt like I had figured it all out. Does it feed on fear?
No.
Gaines chuckled a little to himself and leaned back in his chair.
I saw that movie too. At first I thought the same. The more I've learned, the more I think it doesn't really feed at all. It's not like an animal that eats. It's more like an avalanche, which grows from a tiny rolling snowball. It gets stronger through human imagination, for lack of a better explanation. You wake up from a nightmare one night. You think you see something in your room. Then you think about what it could be. Sometimes I think that the potential for a thing to exist, however impossible, produces results.
I closed my eyes for a moment. I was beginning to get lost in the abstract nature of it all. It could kill you, but it didn't exist or feed or look like what it looked like, but it was real. It was somehow born out of a fearful thought. Gaines had too many vague answers, and I felt that every moment I stayed caused new questions and doubts to form in my mind. I think I better go now, Gaines. If there's anything else you'd like to tell me, I think now is the time. What is my defensive move? Gaines looked like he was about to delve into another 10 minutes of monologue and decided against it. He read the expression on my face and replied with, "Now that you're in the know, you're going to have to suffer through every visit, every terrifying form until it stops. All the while telling yourself that it's not really there. Don't talk to it. Don't acknowledge it. It may try to touch you and you'll likely feel it now, but it's an illusion. It can't interact physically with our world. Don't react. Don't look at it. Don't even close your eyes either. It'll just assault your hearing instead, and it can get loud. Tell yourself in your head that it's not there. I wish I had better advice than that." Gaines stood up and he offered a hand. When I shook it, his other hand also grasped mine, and he leaned in. "Be careful, Barry. I really feel like I'm helping people by giving them the extra level of truth to this." Has anyone ever beat this thing? It was a question I feared the answer to. Gaines' eyes never left mine. "I thought Martin did. He told me that he did, that bugger. And then he died weeks later. I couldn't understand why he would lie to me. I still don't. I think he may have died fighting with all he had. And he didn't have enough. Maybe he couldn't come to terms with the fact that he thought he was fighting a losing battle." My heart sank. "So you don't even know if it's possible?" "If you're strong, I think you can survive this. Yeah, I'm quite hopeful. Our willpower can get us through amazing things, Barry." The drive home felt long, and the more I imagined trying to fall asleep in that house all alone, the more I felt an impending doom, like a blackness was starting to fill up somewhere. Maybe in my room. I imagined walking into an ink-black house awaiting untold horrors. Something ran up from the ditch towards my car. I slammed on the brakes, nearly missing a deer making its way across the highway. I sat there, in the snowy blackness, window wipers flailing, waiting for my body to move, feeling a cold all throughout my chest, not even aware if my temperature in the car was freezing or acceptable. Eventually, I got the car moving again, and on the way home I passed several motels, considering spending a night in one of their rooms instead of my own. In the end, I must have decided I'd rather be in my own home. I pulled into the driveway and walked up the steps to my front door. I turned the knob with hesitation. I turned on almost every light the second I had my hand in the door. The interior was bathed in a bright yellow light, and I threw my jacket to the floor. I turned on the TV and tried to get my mind off the entire thing. I watched things like news and sports until I came across a documentary on how food was processed. I heard something like newspaper crinkling in the kitchen. I muted the TV. I braced myself for what may come and slowly advanced towards the kitchen. And before I turned the corner, the sound stopped mid-crinkle. I looked around the corner, expecting the worst, and found my kitchen empty. No newspaper either. Just then I thought about what Gaines had said, about not turning on the light. He meant, of course, in the middle of the night after waking from sleep. But why bother turning them off in the first place? I walked from room to room, turning on every light so that there was no dark doorways for something to peer in from the blackness. Only I had no lights outside. I went from window to window, shutting every curtain. Every window I feared more than the last, and I stopped looking towards them as I shuttered them. I foolishly looked into the last window, and I screamed when I saw a pale face reflected back at me. It was my own. I remembered the advice Gaines had given me, that I was best to tell myself there was nothing to fear and to be strong. But I felt like a child in a haunted house. It wasn't dilapidated or full of shadows, but it felt like a spider's web just the same. I leaned against the wall and began to feel drowsy. I was scared, more scared than I had ever been before, and my body was exhausted, and I felt the desire to sleep, which in turn brought on a flashback of a hideous thing greeting me upon waking. Would it even show tonight? It had gone weeks without appearing before. I realized how little I really knew about it and what rules it might follow. I thought about how it appeared and disappeared and what that might look like. Would it materialize like a mist? Would it phase towards me through a wall? I tried to stop myself. I tried to stop thinking about it. They weren't thoughts I could control. I pictured horrible shapes and tried to conceive of how a thing would look if it didn't exist, even in fiction. I started to feel something like static electricity start to build, but I felt it in my head. I started seeing things peripherally out of the corner of my eyes. First a shadow looked like some strange animal, and then a chair looked like a sculpture made from clumps of something organic. All at once, every light shut off in my house. I almost screamed again. In fact, I had shut my eyes tight and registered it a second later. I opened them again slowly, and every light was still on. There were no shapes or shadows. I was breathing very fast. My heart felt like a drum. I could feel all the hairs on my body like they were charged with energy. I started to hear sounds, and the more I focused on them and tried to decipher their location, the more they sounded like footsteps. The same pattern as footsteps, but the sounds were soft and thick like dough. I was breathing so fast now. The danger seemed to escalate too quickly. One moment I was safe in my bathtub, the next I was in shark-infested waters. Something turned the corner, and I caught a quick glimpse. I couldn't bring myself to stare at it. I couldn't close my eyes. I didn't want to be in the dark again. I stared at the floor instead, my mind racing with what it had just seen. I thought about the way its skin seemed to be reflective like a mirror, but it was just raw flesh, like a peeled fruit. It was small, about the size of a child, or a baby. I thought about its soft head and how it hung limply. Teeth like a shark littered the one empty eye socket. I could hear it shambling towards me. I could hear it breathing. It sounded like it was dying, but I felt no advantage, no possible victory. I looked up, and it was close enough to touch me. I could see down the jagged hole that was an eye or a mouth. It was teeth all the way down. A smaller mouth below was making silent pronunciations. It took all of my strength, all of my willpower, but I managed to turn away slowly and walk towards my kitchen. My mind went blank. I think that I was in shock. I was suddenly aware that I was reaching for a glass and proceeded to fill it with tap water. I drank from it. I turned. I was alone again. I felt drowsy once more, tired in a way that I had never felt before. I felt tired of being aware of my surroundings. Debating with myself whether it was bravery that saved me or pure dumb luck, I sat down in my recliner. I stared into a blank TV, stared at the reflection of myself sitting in my chair. Out of the blue, I realized that this whole affair was like a fatal version of the game. Some stupid thing I overheard some teenagers talking about in a coffee shop. You are always playing the game, and every time you remember you were playing, you lose. I kept hearing them say, "I lose," over and over. A sudden sense that I was being watched made me turn. Nothing. Somehow, that abomination came from inside my mind. I didn't really understand how such a nightmare could look so real, like it was from an actual hell. But according to Gaines, it was all me. After all, I tried to imagine what it could look like, didn't I? Don't think of pink elephants, he says, and now that's all I can think about. I didn't fall asleep until the following morning. I awoke from a dreamless sleep around dinner time. Lying on the couch, still in the same clothes, I made my way to my laptop. I found Gaines' cell phone number in an email and dialed him immediately without really knowing why. I guess I just needed to talk to someone. The call went straight to his voicemail, and Gaines' recording told me to leave a quick message and he would get back to me. After the beep, my words flowed out like water. Gaines, Jesus, I saw it last night, and it was awful. I don't think, I shouldn't have thought about it, but I never thought it could be so bad. It just had this big fucking hole in the middle of its face. And all the way down, there were all these horrible... Gaines stopped me mid-sentence. Barry! His voice was a small comfort. I'm so glad you're okay. I screened all my calls. I was in the middle of a thing. Just hang on. He didn't put me on hold, but he must have set the phone down. I couldn't hear anything, but he was soon speaking again. Hey, Barry. Look, I know you want to explain to me all the gritty details, but my advice is that you're better off keeping it to yourself. I didn't want to hear any more of his advice right now. Gaines, I just need to talk. Please, just let me talk. Gaines said nothing. I carried on. Thank you. Look, I don't really think I want to imagine it all over again, so I'll spare you, okay? But I just need to, talk. I breathed a little slower and continued. I think that I've never been so depressed in my entire life. I lost a son. I told you that, didn't I? Sudden infant death syndrome. I lost my baby, and it ruined my marriage, and I'm pretty sure a part of me is dead from all that. I think about that every so often, and it makes me very sad. But this thing almost makes me lose my desire to live after a night. How can these exist? What kind of fucking universe allows this shit? Gaines interrupted, or maybe I was finished for the moment. Hey man, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I can only imagine what that was like for you. Your loss as well as last night's events. I'm sorry. But now's not the time to lose faith or motivation. Fuck you, Gaines. My voice was steady and monotone. Go fuck yourself for telling me how I should deal with this. And you're right. How would you... I couldn't breathe. I was having some kind of epiphany. There was one painfully obvious question that had never been asked. I assumed I knew the answer. Assumption is a hell of a thing. You've seen it yourself, haven't you, Gaines? It wasn't a question. Barry, enough detours and cryptic bullshit. Just tell me the truth. There was a silence that seemed to last forever. I couldn't explain my sudden intuition. To his credit, he never lied. I never asked him. But he also never told me. Barry. His voice suddenly sounded very tired and sad. I see it every day, man. My heart was in my throat. Mine was behind you the whole time you were at my office. I couldn't say anything. It's around me almost every moment. I used to think that it would go away. I would have eased you into this, having to deal with it on a daily basis. But I wanted to keep your spirits high. You had to hit the ground sprinting. I wanted to scream. I've been using a combination of meditation and meds. I'm at a point now where I don't even register it most of the time. Sometimes it startles me and I begin to feel it and notice that I notice it, but it stops after a while. Sometimes I get a few hours of peace. There's nothing predictable about it now. I pictured a noose and it felt like an invitation. Martin was my husband. I couldn't breathe. He was already deep down the rabbit hole when we met. I just never found out until after we were married. He started as an outside observer, but soon he began to see it too. I started seeing it not long after. Another side effect of knowing about the damn thing. You skip the whole false monster thing, and one night you're bound to start seeing some god-awful John Carpenter freak show. Can't help it. Impossible not to think about it. You can't see the other person's entity or hear it or feel it, but having each other to rely on made it easier to ignore our own respective horror. Just like it's easier for me to pretend this thing stole a friend from me rather than my soulmate. I finally found my voice. It hurt to speak. Why would he lie to you about defeating it if he knew that there was no end to all this to give false hope? Martin shot himself in the head in our home.
He lied to me, and then he gave in to the darkness. He was human, and he had his limits. He just left me. I need to go now.
Hold on, Gaines. The line went dead. The sun was setting, and I just stood there, with the cordless in my hand, watching it go. The amber light was warm, and I watched little dust particles float aimlessly around me. There was beauty in that moment, a very small comfort. And then the light was gone, and the cold feeling crept in my chest again. Martin never died of a heart attack. He just ended it himself. Frederick Gaines, living a lonely life of delusion, will never be free of it. I dropped the phone and it clattered on the floor. I saw many paths before me, but they all seemed to converge into one road, and that road funneled down into a dark trench. I knew what I had to do. I went to the counter. I reached for a kitchen knife. Movement behind me suddenly. Writhing tendrils came into view, and something that looked like an anglerfish drifted into the living room. Its skin had the texture of dead leaves, and I saw that it wasn't really a fish at all, just a pulsating mass of flailing, whip-like feelers. Its misshapen core looked like it was covered in mold, and there seemed to be something inside, fighting to get out. My legs felt like stone. A squealing thing tore through the festering membrane and landed on the floor. The floating mass that had given some unholy birth started to turn black and deteriorate. A rotten-looking animal sat slumped before me, and the floor was sopping wet. I tried to wrap my brain around what it was. It had limbs that were not limbs, eyes that were so underdeveloped they must have been vestigial, yet it looked right at me, like it knew me. I felt a dull pain, as if from far away. It was a man-sized thing. It was smooth or possibly covered in a fine hair. It was a color that I had never seen before. I couldn't grasp that. Everything about it was a paradox. It was like seeing some perversion of God. It began to scream from a mouth it did not have, and it was the sound of pain. All the pain in the entire world that had ever been seemed to pour out of it. The sound escalated, and a new element was added to the painful roar. Hate as well. It had no face, and yet it seemed like it was a thick knot of agony and spite. The fear I felt, hypnotized by this thing, was bordering on psychedelic. I forgot my own name and where I was. It kept on screaming, and now it was loud as a fighter jet. In that deafening moment, I almost felt a sort of sympathy for it. I was too afraid to reach for it, but I raised my hands in an attempt to... My arms were covered in blood. Blood all over the floor in front of me. I sat down. Blood was running down from my wrists. I must have meant to do it earlier, but I was interrupted by his presence. I don't remember when I did it. I just remember that it was all too much. The kitchen knife sitting in a pile of my blood like a dead fish. I thought I would be suffering for weeks, but I couldn't live a day after this. Not after seeing this thing. Its banshee wail was subsiding a little. Now it only sounded like a power saw. I realized it was screaming because it was dying, along with its host. Gaines was wrong. It was alive in its own way. It could hurt, and there was perhaps only a single way to kill it. We both sat there, the thing and I, watching the other die. It had stopped screaming. I think it was locked in this form. I felt very cold, and there was a lot of pain everywhere. I didn't want to spend my last moments alive staring at this forsaken wretch. So I focused my attention at a painting on my wall, a print of some artist I'd forgotten the name of. The wretch began to crawl away, and I didn't care. The painting was of a farmhouse in a beautiful green field. I thought about the idea of reuniting with my infant son. We could live in that painting together. It was an imperfect idea, but it felt like a nice thing to think about. And then I closed my eyes. I was starting to see a light, or some sort of glow from nowhere. It felt warm and good. I saw my boy. He was a little older, as old as he would have if darkness again. I heard a sound, something from behind me. I opened my eyes. I went to turn my head, but I was so lightheaded I fell on my side. The thing. It was focusing on an object. I couldn't see so well, and I couldn't tell what it was. It was trying to crush something. It was putting all of its force into its one needle-like appendage, trying to destroy my cordless phone. Gaines had made the assumption that it couldn't affect the physical world. I suddenly saw with horrible clarity its needle point pushing on the ambulance hotkey. It was the size of a gorilla, trying to depress a single button that was a millimeter deep. It screamed again, louder than it ever had been, and doubled its effort. Every window in my home shattered, blowing inward like a vacuum. The button sunk in ever so slightly. Quiet little tones played faintly, a little melody. The thing born from my mind, the thing with no mouth, turned towards me and smiled. Epilogue. Gaines and I share a drink every so often. We talk about our jobs, about sports. We pretend to each other that there isn't something very wrong, that we're not dead inside. I had my moment of strength, but I'm done fighting now. All I do is eat and sleep. I can't do much of either. I think this is how it wants me. A meager host, not weak enough to die, not strong enough to end it all. One who won't admit it's there, but is afraid of it all the same. This is my life now. Martin was the brave one.